There are a lot of track themes that repeat throughout the Mario Kart series. Rainbow Road is of course the most iconic, but there are more like Mario Circuits and Bowser's Castles. I've already made videos talking about the Rainbow Roads and Mario Circuits of the series, so I think it makes perfect sense to talk about the Bowser's Castle. Well actually, I've been requested a decent amount recently to make a video looking through all of the Donkey Kong maps from throughout the Mario Kart series. That makes a good amount of sense, seeing as both Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bananza are both recent releases, and Mario Kart World brought with it a few more DK tracks. Welcome to another episode of Level by Level. Today we're going to be analyzing all the Mario Kart series DK tracks and their remakes to determine which I think is the best. Basically, any track with DK in the name will be included here, and he's actually one of the characters to get the most variety in the tracks named after them. Okay, well Wario still owns him. Over the course of the Mario Kart series, there have been a total of 13 tracks, including remakes with DK in the name, as long as you ignore Tory System. We'll be going through them in chronological order, and as we do so, we'll be placing them on a tier list. This list only considers the tracks against each other, so an F tier track on this list is not necessarily an F tier with every Mario Kart track considered. So if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's jump right in. Unfortunately, we got no DK track in Super Mario Kart. In fact, Donkey Kong wasn't even in this game at all and was replaced by this freak. So the first real Donkey Kong track is from Mario Kart 64, being DK Jungle Parkway. Now if you went into this video without seeing any of the Donkey Kong tracks, this is probably what you would imagine all of them being. Jungles are heavily associated with Donkey Kong, so his first track being in a jungle makes a lot of sense. Visually, this feels a lot like some of the first levels in Donkey Kong Country, so I think at least in that aspect, this track works quite well. But what about the layout of the course itself? I would say it's probably the most generic of the tracks we have to talk about, but it's not bad. The opening for this track is the most iconic part as you race alongside a river. I like how this opens up the area to give you both a nice view of the jungle and the boat moving along the water. Of course, this river isn't just for show as we get to this track's big highlight, the massive jump. While this wouldn't be anything super special today, the big jumps on the N64 were definitely highlights of the few tracks they were included in. It's certainly my favorite part of the track, and I really like how much control you have over where you land here. A lot of cannon shots in modern Mario Kart games sort of stick you in a mostly straight line, which works fine, but I do think the large range of angles we can land out here was pretty neat too. Though that does mean it's possible to jump into the river if you have a really bad angle, so make sure you land correctly. Overall though, this is definitely the highlight of the track. Mario, look out, what are you doing? Oh, never mind, I guess. After landing, we have a few turns on some more dense jungle areas, which I like for having a different feel from the start. I also like how if you go in the off-road here, the track will actually throw fruits at the player. This is a totally unique gimmick for just this track, which I think is a cool addition, even if it isn't super major. After a few turns through the densely packed jungle, you'll notice that eventually the floor dips and leads to a bridge over some water. I quite like this bridge for a few reasons. It's a distinct landmark, and it's extremely skinny. While you can't fall off of it unless you suck. This being so skinny makes it a perfect place to hit other racers with items. But for the end of the race, we have to go through a cave section, which is a nice setting shift and has a pretty neat shortcut. Normally, you have to take this pretty long turn through the cave, but funnily enough, the off-road here doesn't actually slow you down. If you go toward this hill and spam the drift hop, you'll actually be able to climb it and save some time. This is better to do with the mushroom, but still possible without one, which just feels really good. So overall, I think I actually like this track a bit more than I remembered. It's not the most distinct track in the world, but it has a lot of fun moments, and I think it works well as a first track for DK and Mario Kart. So for the sake of this tier list, I'll throw it in C tier. It has a lot of tough competition if that seems harsh. Oh yeah, and to end off each segment, I'll talk about the music. This is easily the weakest song in the DK track selection, and probably one of the weaker songs in Mario Kart. Not that it's terrible, it just doesn't feel like it ever gets started. Alright, I had a lot more to say on that one than I was expecting, so how does our second DK track hold up? This comes to us from Mario Kart Double Dash, being DK Mountain. This is one of the Mario Kart series' most iconic tracks, and it's for very good reason, as the concept here is fantastic. We're still sticking pretty close to the jungle theming aesthetic-wise, but of course, this time we get the giant volcano. Right away with this course, we can see how different it is from our last one with the very first set of turns. They're on a bit of a slope, and this track works a lot with slopes throughout its track design. Putting turns on slopes can make it a bit harder to control yourself, which, as we'll see, makes this one of the harder tracks in the series, at least in my opinion. Eventually, after a big turn, we reach this track's cannon. I really like how instead of having the open jump from the last track, we instead get a cannon based on the barrels from the Donkey Kong series. Throughout the games, barrel cannons are used a lot, so it makes a ton of sense to be here. Shooting out of this cannon sends us all the way up to the top of the titular DK mountain, which reveals the theme of this track to be a race back down to the bottom. This is such a good idea, and I think this track executes it beautifully. And also shooting up to see the volcano's face is great every time. To start this trek back down, we spend a bit of time on the stony volcano, which is expectedly filled with a lot of downhill driving. Not only does that make it harder to control, but the stony section is also filled with a ton of bumps that can also throw you off. Unfortunately, since we are looking at the double dash version right now, there's no tricking in this game, which does make some of the jumps here a lot less exciting. Obviously can't blame the track for that, but it is a note to keep in mind for later. Before leaving the stone section, I also have to note that some rolling boulders can be thrown in here, which just add even more obstacles to fit the track's difficulty. But what's probably my favorite part of the track is when we move back to the jungle area. The turns here are absolutely brutal. This is really where the slopes I was talking about come into play, as pretty much all of them are extremely tough with very harsh vertical angles. I also really like how brutal the turn is next to the cliffside, as the fences not only disappear, but the road is broken, so it's very easy to fall off. Since the fence is gone though, if you're skilled enough, you can actually cut this turn by hopping the gap, which is a really scary but cool shortcut. But if you manage to survive all of those brutal turns, we get one last dangerous obstacle with the bridge. Unlike the one on our last track, there are no fences this time, and the bridge is wavy, which makes it quite the scary ending to the track. But yeah, overall, another great showing from Donkey Kong here, and it's extremely obvious why this track is seen as being so good. The difficulty and theming is fantastic, so I can't see any better place for this than A tier. That may seem low for how much praise I gave this, but keep in mind we do still have some of the remakes for this track coming up soon. Oh, and of course the song is also a banger. Since it shares a theme with Dino Dino Jungle, it's also present in Mario Kart World, and that remix is one of my favorite songs in that game, so I'm also a big fan of the original. Next up on the chopping block, we have a track that dared to ask the question, what if Donkey Kong was cold? That's where we get DK Pass from Mario Kart DS. This is a sharp departure from the jungle themes of the last two tracks, taking place on a snowy road going uphill. I appreciate the willingness to try something new, but did it work? This is definitely seen by most people as the weakest Donkey Kong track, and I can't help but agree. Not only is it far from being the best snowy mountain track in Mario Kart, it's not even the best snowy mountain DK track. The course starts with you going through an icy tunnel and then just riding up some turns towards the top. These turns don't really feel that special. Sure, some of them have snowmen, which is cool, but since they're on the edge, it's pretty hard to run into them by mistake, and if you do, you're probably gonna fall off anyway. The giant rolling snowball is a nice addition, but not quite enough to save this from feeling pretty basic. Once you reach the top and hit the snow section, there is actually a kind of neat Easter egg here. By using a mushroom to go into the off-road, you'll be able to find a hidden item box, but this is actually a special item box. See, this can only give you either a star, mushroom, triple mushrooms, or a red shell, regardless of position. That feels really random, but at least it's something to give this track a bit more identity. Anyway, back to the actual track, this snowy part is definitely much more interesting as it's a lot more bumpy, and you have to dodge several rolling snowballs. It's not crazy unique or difficult, but definitely a bit more noteworthy than what came before. Finally, to end off the track, we have a big leap off of a dash panel into the final turn. The snowmen here actually act as pretty good obstacles, making it difficult to take this turn tightly. But that does bring us to the end of the track, and yeah, this is definitely the weakest DK course. It's not terrible, but just feels pretty generic all things considered, especially with the other, much better snow mountains that come out later, so it really feels like there's no reason to come back to this, unless you really love the snowmen. So I'm gonna go ahead and put DK Pass in F tier. Keep in mind, I do not think this is an F tier track in the series as a whole. This tier list is only the Donkey Kong track, so something had to go here. As for the song, it's just alright. It fits the track and is pleasant to listen to, but not really a standout banger. Mario Kart Wii is our biggest DK fan to date, with a total of 3 Donkey Kong based tracks, 1 original and 2 remakes. Let's start with that original one, as it gives us a very nice comparison to the last track we covered. That track is DK Summit. Oh sorry, DK Snowboard Cross for the British out there. DK Summit is often seen as one of the series' absolute best tracks, which is funny coming directly off the other snowy DK track being found as quite mid. So what did DK Summit do to make it so much better? Well, we can see right at the start that the track is much more exciting as we begin with another barrel cannon shot. This is very similar in concept to DK Mountain, where we shoot up to the top of the summit and have to race back down. To make this more unique though, it utilizes its snow setting extremely well, as this track is all about snowboarding. Once you reach the top, you'll notice the half pipes line the walls of this area, which of course was a new gimmick introduced in Wii. This also perfectly works with the snowboarding idea, as it gives you plenty of areas to do tricks. It just adds a lot of fun to this turn and makes it so much more exciting to go down. Continuing with the tricking theme, we get a bit of a split path after that, which lets us either trick on some small bumps or go on a big ramp with the dash panel. I like having the choice here, as it makes each run through this track feel a bit different. After a few patches of snow, we get this track's iconic bumpy road, as there are a ton of tiny hills here. In previous games this would be quite annoying, but since Mario Kart Wii introduced the tricking tricking mechanic, it's actually quite fun to drive through here and get as much speed as possible. That speed can be pretty dangerous going into this next segment though, as we have two pretty brutal slope turns near a cliff, reminding me a lot of my favorite segment from DK Mountain. Not only are there also half pipes here to add a bit more interaction though, but there's also another gap jump here too. This one is even cooler than the one on DK Mountain, as you have to cross two gaps this time, which is even more scary. But that brings us to the final segment of the track, which really ties the snowboarding theme together. We've got a big half pipe here, and there are snowboarding shy guys doing tricks on it. We have to try and avoid getting hit by them while also avoiding the large amount of snow in this segment. The best way to do that is to use a half pipe ramps to trick over all of it, which is just extremely fun. In fact, this might be my favorite implementation of the half pipe gimmick on any track. It fits the theme so perfectly and makes for a fantastic obstacle. So yeah, this definitely had a lot more interesting content than DK Pass did, which makes this feel so much better. It had an interesting snowboarding theme and managed to execute it pretty much flawlessly. So I think this is gonna be our first S tier of the video. I really have no complaints. And that extends to the fantastic song, as it's easily the best one so far. Also shoutouts to KK Slider for the cameo. But we've been talking about original tracks for quite a bit now. Let's slow down a tiny bit and talk about Wii's 2 remakes to see if they improved on the original and by how much. The first is a remake of DK's Jungle Parkway, and it might actually be worse. Yeah, the layout doesn't change pretty much at all, but the small changes that are here, I think I prefer on the N64 version. First off, we removed the fruits that get thrown at you if you go into the off-road, which I thought was a cute detail of the first version. Then, we also turned the big jump here fully into a cannon, so you can't really influence where you fly. Again, not a huge change, but I just like how the original handled this better. And finally, the biggest change has to do with the cut inside the cave, as it now requires a mushroom on Wii, which is understandable, but hopping up the steep slope on the N64 was pretty fun. Add on that there's literally nowhere to trick on this track, which normally helps any remake surpass its original version, and I think Mario Kart 64 is gonna take this one over Wii. The changes are small enough to where this remake still belongs in C tier, but I think the 64 version is gonna be higher. Luckily for Wii though, its second remake is an actual improvement over its original. I mentioned in the DK Mountain segment that some of the jumps felt a bit disappointing because there was no tricking. This was actually very subtle foreshadowing to Mario Kart Wii's version, now letting the player trick. I'm a pretty talented writer if you couldn't tell. The tricking massively improves the segment on the volcano, as it feels much better jumping down off these ramps. And speaking of tricking, this remake also added some half-pipe ramps, which fit perfectly into DK Mountain due to how sloped the turns were in the original. While the changes may feel small, they really do make the track feel so much better to race on. Now, if I were to give a few nitpicks, the road is a bit bigger here at the end, which makes sense due to there now being 12 racers instead of 8, but I do think it takes away a little bit of the difficulty. Also, I feel like the bridge at the end should have been way more wavy to work with the tricking mechanic. So yeah, this is still a big improvement over the original, so much so that I think this remake belongs up in S tier. Just having the tricking mechanic is a fantastic addition. Music for both of these remakes are about the same as their originals, by the way. On to Mario Kart 7, we got one new track and one remake. So to start us off with the original one, we have DK Jungle. This is probably the most direct track with its Donkey Kong Country influence, more specifically Donkey Kong Country Returns. In fact, according to the wiki, this track was actually made by Retro Studios, the team behind DKC Returns. Now I think the fact that this is so reference heavy is really neat, even if I haven't played much Donkey Kong outside of Bananza. With that said though, for some reason I've never loved racing on this track. I know that I'm in the minority here, but it's never been one of my favorites in either of the games it's appeared in. But alright, let's get into the layout. We start off in a pretty dense jungle area, and right away we can see a barrel on the track, which of course sticks well with the DK theming. If you run into it like an idiot, you can even get an item. To exit the forest, you get to trick off a tree root and then make a big jump onto a bouncy flower. I like how you can see Donkey Kong's house while you're jumping, that's a cute touch. Upon landing, you get faced with a turn full of tiki goons, and they shuffle back and forth, which can sometimes lead to you getting hit by them if you aren't careful. I always appreciate when a track has an exclusive obstacle, even if they aren't mechanically that crazy. Moving back into the jungle, we are faced with a little split path. The easy road has us drive past some frogs on the frog goons on the ground, which is fairly fun. Most of the time though, you'll want to go down the slightly harder path by going off-road, as it leads to a skinny ramp with a glider. I like that this shortcut doesn't require a mushroom, even if it could have maybe been a bit harder. Both paths eventually converge onto a bunch of ramps leading into a banana temple. It's pretty fun to trick off these just by driving, but I like how it can also be used to extend your glider time if you want to. Now once you get inside the temple, the track definitely slows down a bit. The temple doesn't really have any obstacles and the turns are very plain. The banana is a neat set piece, but doesn't really affect gameplay. The glider segment after this is also pretty plain, but having the screaming pillars at the side does at least make it a little more interesting than the temple. The final turn is pretty well done with two split paths, a faster one that requires a tighter turn, and a longer route that can give you some more coins. I pretty much always go for the faster route though, especially especially because this is right at the end. So overall, I'd say this is a pretty average track. Not super exciting, but the references to Donkey Kong Country are pretty neat. I'll put this up in B tier. I was struggling on if I liked this or Jungle Parkway more, but since DK Jungle feels a lot more developed, I think it should be above it. As for the song, this is a really good remix of DK Island Swing. It's one of the most iconic Donkey Kong songs there is, so it's a perfect fit here. Now onto 7's remake, we have DK Pass, and this is gonna be a super quick one. The improvements here were all pretty minor, but they are definitely improvements. At the Snowy Mountain portion, several ramps were added, which help with the gameplay as we can now trick off of them. The main ramp at the end also has been turned into a glider, which doesn't affect gameplay a ton, but it's cool that it's there, I guess. Finally, the secret item box does still exist, but now red shells have been taken out of the item pool, so it only gives mushrooms, triple mushrooms, or stars. Like I said, not a lot of changes here, but it is at least slightly better than the original. Oh yeah, it's snowing now, yay! I'll put this right above the original in F tier. The song is again about the same quality-wise. On to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and we have our first game to not have an original DK track since Mario Kart Super Circuit. Luckily, it does make up for that by having 3 whole remakes, 1 in the base game and 2 coming from the Booster Course Pass. The one in the base game was a remake of DK Jungle, and there were some decent improvements here. Not only does this track look so much better due to being in Mario Kart 8, but the layout around the ending also has been changed. Once you get inside the temple, you'll notice that it now uses anti-gravity. That makes the interior feel far less plain, even if the gameplay itself isn't horribly different. Just having the turn go up as a wall a little feels so much more fun. Plus at the banana, there's also a jump now, which I think was a nice addition too. Speaking of jumps, probably my favorite improvement comes at the ending. Originally, the split road was completely connected, but now the faster route requires a jump. That makes it much harder and riskier to take, and I think that was a warranted change to make both paths feel a bit more worth it. Overall, this is certainly an improvement. Not so much so where it jumps up a tier, but definitely better than the original, so I'll put it above it in B tier. Also, my brother wanted me to say banana like a minion here, so please call him out in the comments, I'm begging you. Our first of the 2 Booster Course Pass tracks is DK Summit, so let's see if this is able to top the original and land at number 1 in the tier list. First off, visually, they changed the giant Mario statue here into a Donkey Kong statue. As much as I love Super Mario, this is a Donkey Kong track, get out of here. That does mean this version misses out on the Easter egg of the statue here having a Mii head when you play as a Mii, but I play as Dry Bones, so I don't really care. Anyway, I'm just stalling because this track really has no gameplay changes to speak of. It's basically exactly the same as it was in Wii, just with a visual upgrade, though sometimes the half pipes can be a bit wonky. Honestly though, this doesn't really affect normal gameplay too much, so I think the visual updates do make this the better version. So I'm just gonna put this above the original in S tier. The song remix is also really good here. The last Mario Kart 8 remake is DK Mountain, which released in the final wave of the Booster Course Pass, and just like in Summit, it's very similar to the original. The biggest visual update is of course the face of the volcano, which now lets us see the lava behind it, which I thought was a really neat looking change. As for some gameplay differences, the ramps in the volcano have now been turned back into stone and made wider after they were wood in the Wii version. There's also a few barrels here now, which don't do a ton, but I guess more obstacles are nice to have even if they're small. And finally, the bridge at the end became way more wavy, which lets you trick off of it. If you remember, I subtly foreshadowed this bridge change in the Wii segment. No one on YouTube does it like me. So yeah, this is just the Wii version, but better. That makes this pretty easy to put it right above it in S tier once again. The remix of the song is also pretty good, though again, the World version is the best version of the song. And speaking of World, we made it to our final game with 1 original track and 1 remake. I'm gonna mix it up this time and talk about the remake first, just so we can end the video with a more interesting piece of discussion. The track that was remade here is DK Pass, and this was a really weird choice. Pretty much no one was asking for this, but I'll be honest, they definitely did improve it quite a bit. I mean, they did it better than Desert Hills. This mostly comes down to how the track implements Mario Kart World's parkour mechanics, and the first noticeable change comes with this turn near the start. Using this game's ability to jump off poles, you can actually cut this turn by jumping off-road here. This is such a fun shortcut to take because it doesn't require a mushroom, saves a good chunk of time, and is pretty difficult to pull off. In fact, it might be one of my favorite cuts in this video, which helps us track out a lot even if it may seem small. But you know what? That's not even the only shortcut here. If you instead go towards this wall and charge jump, you can get over the cliff and save some time that way. In fact, due to this track's cliff-based design, there is a lot of wall riding you can do to save time on turns, which makes this track a lot more fun. Even if you're not huge into the shortcuts though, you got to at least appreciate the changes to the Snowy Mountain portion. This had a few cabins added, which really make it have a more cozy vibe, and the road here just has a lot more stuff on it like trees to run into and logs to rail grind on. Plus, if you are into the big skips, using the newly added ramp, you can jump onto the nearby walls and trees to save a ton of time too. Now I do kind of miss the rolling snowballs here, but I think the added stuff makes up for their loss. As for the ending of the track, this is a bit weirder to me. The jump at the end has been turned from a glider ramp into this long snowboarding ramp, which I don't know how I feel about, especially without the snowballs. The biggest hit to the track though was definitely the very end, completely removing the snowman. This feels so weird to to me, especially because they made Snowman a racer in this game. There are some snowboarding Shy Guys here, but I feel like they aren't nearly as interesting. At least there is a new off-road cut, which is nice. Overall, while the ending is slightly worse, the track as a whole is massively improved by the shortcuts. I still don't really love the choice to bring it back, but they definitely made the remake worthwhile, so I think I'm gonna move this up into B tier. Wait, it doesn't have the special item box anymore? I honestly think I'll enjoy this track more the more I play it. The remix is also an improvement over the original song, but not by too much. But to end us off, we have the latest entry in the DK track selection with DK Spaceport. This is easily the most unique of the DK tracks, both due to the setting and gameplay. First off, this is a section track rather than a lap-based one, so you have to go through all 6 sections rather than repeating the same lap 3 times. Looking at the minimap, it's pretty clear to see how those sections are divided, as this course is very zigzaggy. That may seem like a weird track design choice, but the reasoning will become clear as we start to race. The first section begins with a pretty simple set of jumps and a split turn, which all brings us to a glider ramp. This is where we get to finally understand the theme behind this track, as if you look at it, this is actually a recreation of 25M from the original Donkey Kong. That is such a cool idea, and I think they did a great job making each of the segments interesting to race through. I also love the giant robo DK, as it's pretty distinct visually, and of course fits the theme perfectly. Getting to see it roar and then hop away is a fantastic start to the track, and a good way to bring us into section 2. Pretty much every section from here on out is a straight shot with a turn at the end, which you can use mushrooms on to cut through. This formula works really well, and I like how most of these turns have the oil barrels lifted straight from the original game. What makes this formula work as well as it does is the fact that each section's gameplay is totally different. For section 2, you have to use bounce pads to jump over rolling barrels, and I don't think I have to explain to you all why that works well in a DK-inspired track. I also like the little extra platform you can jump onto to get some coins near the end. Section 3 not only adds a fire snake to make the off-road cut even scarier, but also ramps up the difficulty with the barrels. Since they're now rolling horizontally instead of towards you, I found them to be a bit trickier to dodge, especially if you try and use the ramps to jump over them. Section 4's focus shifts over to rail grinding, which I think works well for this track as it's the final one in the Mushroom Cup, so essentially this acts as a test on one of the game's new gimmicks. Although I will say, when I was playing online, I got a bit robbed. Jumping between the rails is a lot of fun, even if it is pretty simple, plus it's nice that there are even a ton of ramps below this just in case you fall. Matching with the gimmick test theme, Section 5 has us use a lot of wall jumps. It's really fun to jump back and forth here, and I like how you can get on top of these walls in the middle if you do it right. But Section 6 is of course the culmination of this track and really this video as a whole, as we get to face off against DK himself. This segment is really short, but it's also very intense, as the music speeds up and we have to dodge barrels being thrown around. These are far less predictable than the ones we saw before, as they bounce in really weird ways. I think it's perfectly fitting for the end of the race, and it feels great being able to take a breath of relief after passing under DK. But that wraps up the final track of this video, and I think it was a pretty great one to end on. It's a lot easier than the ones we have up in S tier, but for a Mushroom Cup track, this is phenomenal. I loved the idea of taking the layout of 25M, and I think they nailed it just about as best as they could. So for me, I think this is a solid A tier. Oh, and the song here is fantastic. Not only does it change based on the segment, but it's just a jam. It might even be my favorite song in this video. It's definitely the original track theme I found stuck in my head the most from Mario Kart World. All of that really came together to craft one of the strongest DK tracks in the Mario Kart series. But anyways, that's it for this video. Do you love DK Mountain and Mario Kart Tour specifically and hate me for not including it? Let me know in the comments. This was a lot longer of a video than I was thinking it would be, but hopefully it was enjoyable for you all. I'm also happy to say that the Bananza level ranking did a lot better than I was expecting it to, so I might be able to make a few more videos on the game in the future. And thank you all for the support in general right now, as it's getting tough editing with my college finals for the summer leading directly into the next semester. If uploads continue to be a bit shaky, I apologize. But before I go, I've got to thank my members, being MaidZO2, Magnus Larslot, Trifector, Luma, Tibby, Drybones, Fredbear's Diner, Mario Master 101, Hippopotamus, Levi Strux, Nuclear, Cassie Channel, Blessed Tiger, Yanni the Duck, Wyatt Derpy, Trader Mo, Mevins 2001, Kid Trunks 15, Enchanted Skull, SMA, B Major 2003, Arson the Raboot, Sir Moosty, Belandor, Cinder CC, Jade Avery, Punzel Clone, Thicky Reiki, Ingenio TM, CW McCain, JubeTube, Tesseract, Mr. McMahon 5702, Jameson Pageson, Golden Stand 15, Z Frost, Stuffy Ant, Just X, Concanut to Keep, and Christian Flattery Sequel Edition. But anyways, dry bones for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.